Wyoming, 1888. Caleb Hutchins had mended more fences in his life than any man could rightly count, and not one of them had ever been his own. He was 32 years old, and for the better part of 15 years he had drifted from ranch to ranch across the territory with a coil of wire over one shoulder and a bag of tools over the other, hired by the week to fix what other men's cattle, weather, and neighbors had broken. He had a feel for wooden wire that most men spent a lifetime never learning, an instinct for where a post would fail before it failed. But a man who spends his life fixing other people's boundaries eventually starts to wonder about the shape of his own. And Caleb had stopped asking himself that question a long time ago. The answer never changed. He had a horse, a saddle, and a reputation that foremen remembered when their wire came down in the night. There had been a woman once, years before, on a ranch outside Cheyenne, a foreman's daughter who had liked him well enough for one summer and then watched him ride out at the end of the season the way he always did, because the job was done and there was always another job somewhere else. She had not been unkind about it. She had simply understood faster than he had that a man who never stayed anywhere could not reasonably be asked to stay for her either. He had thought about her sometimes in the years since, not with any particular grief, but with the low, steady ache of a question he had never let himself answer honestly. He told himself he liked the road. He had started somewhere around his 30th year to suspect that he had simply never given himself a reason not to like it. He rode into the Foster place on a cold morning in April, following word in town that the eastern boundary fence had been cut twice in a month and the owner needed it fixed before she lost more cattle to the open range on the other side. What he found was not what he expected. The house was small but sound, the barn patched and swept, and the woman standing in the yard with a rifle broken open over one arm was not waiting for him with the nervous hope of someone who could not manage alone. She was watching him the way a person watches weather, carefully and without any particular need of him. Her name was Abigail Foster. Everyone in the territory who knew her called her Abby, and the ones who did not know her simply called her the woman on the Foster claim, said with a certain caution, because a widow's daughter running 160 acres alone in her third year of proving up was not a common thing, and uncommon things made people talk. She was 27, dark-haired, with the kind of steadiness in her face that came from having already survived the worst thing that could happen to her, which was her father dying in the second winter of the claim and leaving her the choice between abandoning it or finishing it herself. She had chosen to finish it. "You're the fence man," she said. It was not a question. "Caleb Hutchins," he said, "I heard your east line's been cut." "Twice," she said. "Once in March, once 9 days ago. Whoever's doing it knows exactly where to cut and exactly when I won't catch them at it." He looked past her at the fence line, running east toward the ridge. At the gap he could see even from here, wire pulled and coiled off to the side, not just cut but taken, which told him something the cutting alone would not have. Someone wanted the wire gone, not just the fence down. "I only came to fix the fence," he said. "Then fix it," she said, "and we'll see what else needs fixing after that." He did not know yet how much that sentence would come to mean. He unsaddled his horse and got to work. What Caleb learned in his first week on the Foster claim, mostly from Abby herself and the rest from the land office clerk in town, was this. Her father, Thomas Foster, had filed on the 160 acres under the Homestead Act 6 years before, in 1882, with the requirement that stood between a filing and an actual patent to the land, 5 years of continuous residence and cultivation. proof that a person had built a house, broken ground, planted crops, and lived on the claim as their sole home, not as a speculation to sell off later. Thomas had done all of it faithfully for 2 winters before the fever took him, and under the law, his daughter had the right to finish the proof herself, provided she could show the same continuous residence and improvement through the full 5 years. Her final proving up hearing, the one where she would stand before the land office and demonstrate the claim was hers by right, was set for the last week of June. 2 months away. And someone, in the 2 years since her father died, had been trying to make it look like she could not hold the place. The fence was the smallest part of it. Cattle from the open range to the east had wandered onto her planted acres twice the previous summer, trampling corn she needed for the winter and for the proof of cultivation the land office would ask to see. Both times, the fence had come down first. A person unfamiliar with homestead law might call it bad luck. Caleb, who had spent 15 years riding the boundary lines of half the territory, called it something else. Somebody wanted witnesses and a land office report that said Abigail Foster's improvements did not hold up, that her fences did not stand, that her land was not being worked the way the law required. He asked her who benefited if her claim failed. She did not hesitate. Silas Dunmore, she said. He runs cattle on 11 sections east of here, open range, no fence of his own because he's never needed one. If my claim lapses, the land goes back to the government for someone else to file on, and there's exactly someone in this county with the money and the men to file on it fast and keep the water on my creek out of anyone else's hands. You've told the land office this. I've told them I suspect it. Suspicion isn't proof. And Silas Dunmore has never touched my fence with his own hands in his life. He's careful that way. The creek was the part of it Caleb understood best, because water was the one thing on the plains no amount of money could invent where it did not already run. The Foster claim sat on the only stretch of Willow Creek that held through August in a dry year, and every section east of it, all 11 of Dunmore's, depended on cattle being driven west to drink at that same water in the worst months of summer. A claim held by a single woman who might in a bad year sell out or fail her proof was worth more to Silas Dunmore than almost any other quarter section in the county, because whoever held the Foster claim held the creek, and whoever held the creek held every dry summer that was coming for the next 20 years. Caleb looked at the fence line and at the woman beside him who had spent 2 years alone defending 160 acres against a man with 11 sections and money enough to hire whatever he needed hired, and understood for the first time in a long while that there was a kind of work worth doing that had nothing to do with wire and posts at all. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I think this is worth sitting with before we go further. Abby Foster had every reason, by the second winter alone on that claim, to walk away and call it a loss nobody would blame her for. She didn't. She stayed, and she kept fixing what broke, and she kept planting what the frost didn't take, because the land was hers by every measure that mattered except the one a hearing in June would decide. If you're watching this tonight from wherever you are, and this is the first time you found this channel, I want you to know we're just getting started here, and there are a lot more nights like this one coming. If Abby's story has found a place in your heart already, hit subscribe before you go anywhere else tonight. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to a channel this young. Now let's get back, because Caleb Hutchins is about to find out exactly how far Silas Dunmore is willing to go. The barbed wire itself was still new enough in 1888 that half the old-timers in the territory distrusted it on principle. It had been patented only 14 years before, and it had changed everything about how land got held in the West. because for the first time, a person of modest means could enclose ground that used to take a standing army of cowhands to protect. Open-range men hated it. Homesteaders depended on it. And in more counties than this one, over the past several years, the argument between the two had turned to wire cutters in the dark and, in the worst cases, to shooting. Caleb had seen fence cutting turn ugly in 3 different territories, and he had heard enough talk in enough bunkhouses to know that the same quiet trouble simmering between the open-range cattlemen and the homesteaders in this part of Wyoming had not finished playing itself out yet, not by a long way. Men like Dunmore saw the whole territory the way it had been 20 years earlier. Open and unclaimed and answerable to whoever could run the most cattle over it. Men like Thomas Foster, and now his daughter, saw it the way the government in Washington had decided it would be from now on. Divided into quarter sections that belonged on paper, and eventually, in fact, to whoever proved they had earned them. Caleb recognized the particular quiet of a dispute that had not yet turned to open violence, but was close, and he intended to do everything in his power to see that it did not reach that point on this particular fence line. He restrung the east fence in 4 days, setting the posts deeper than before, and splicing the wire with a double joint that would hold under more strain than a simple cut could easily undo. It would not stop a man with wire cutters and time. Nothing would. But it would slow him down, and it would leave marks that a careful man could read afterward. Abby watched him work the way she watched most things, with the attention of someone who did not waste her trust, but gave it fully once it was earned. On the 3rd evening, she brought him supper in the barn instead of making him come to the house, and sat with him while he ate, not because it was required, but because the day's work had gone well and she found she did not want it to end in separate silence. "You could take a job on a bigger spread," she said. "Steady wages, no wire cutting in the night." "I could," he said. "Why don't you?" He considered the question longer than she expected. 15 years I fixed what wasn't mine," he said. "I got good at it because I never had to think about whether the work would still matter to me in a year. It never had to. It wasn't mine to matter." He looked at the fence line, dark now against the last light. "This is the first fence I've built where I found myself hoping it holds for reasons that aren't about the wage." She did not answer that directly, but she refilled his coffee before he asked, and that was its own kind of answer. They rode into town together the following week for seed and nails, and Caleb learned something about the cost of Abby's independence that had nothing to do with wire or cattle. Martha Klein at the general store was polite enough to her face, but Caleb caught the look that passed between Martha and another customer when Abby's back was turned. The particular look reserved for a woman living alone on a claim with a hired man and no chaperone in sight. It was not spoken aloud. It did not need to be. A land office hearing asked a claimant to prove continuous, faithful residence as a fit and proper home, and a whisper about impropriety, repeated to the right ears before June, could do quiet damage that no amount of honest fence work could undo. Caleb understood, riding home beside her in silence, that Dunmore did not need his men to cut wire more than twice more. He only needed patience, and the county's own gossip to do the rest of the work for him. "They talk," Abby said finally, when they were far enough from town that the words felt safe. "They've talked since the day my father died and I didn't sell out. I stopped listening to it a long time ago." "They could talk their way into your hearing," Caleb said. "A registrar hears whispers same as anyone." "Then we'll give them nothing to whisper about that isn't true," she said. And there was an edge of steel in it that told him the conversation for her was already finished. He respected her enough not to press it further, though he moved his bedroll out to the barn that same night, not because she asked him to, but because he had decided on his own that her hearing in June was worth more than his comfort in April. I need to stop you again for just a second, because I want to ask you something, and I mean it honestly. Have you ever done a piece of work, small or large, where partway through you noticed you cared about the outcome in a way you hadn't expected to? Tell me about it in the comments if you have. You can write it out fully, or you can just say, I know that feeling, and let that be enough. This is only the second story I've told on this channel, and I would love to know it has already found people who felt something true in it. Now, let's get back to Wyoming, because June is coming fast, and Silas Dunmore is not done yet. The second cutting came on a night in May, 11 days before Caleb had planned to ride the fence line a final time before the hearing. He woke to the sound Abby's dog made when cattle were moving where they should not be, and came out into a night with no moon to find 40 head of Dunmore's cattle already through a gap in the northeast corner, trampling the young corn that stood between Abby and a clean proving up report. He and Abby worked until dawn, getting the cattle pushed back through the gap and the wire spliced closed again. And in the grey light before sunrise, Caleb found what he had been looking for since the first cutting in March. Boot prints, 3 sets, none of them Abby's or his own, and a cut in the wire that was clean, deliberate, made with a tool, not an accident of weather or a careless rider. He followed the prints east for half a mile before they met horse tracks and disappeared toward Dunmore land. He rode to the Dunmore ranch that same morning alone and found Silas Dunmore on his own porch, a heavy man of 50 with the unhurried manner of someone who had never in his life needed to hurry for anyone. "You've got men cutting Foster fence," Caleb said. No greeting. He had decided on the ride over that greetings were wasted on a man like this. "That's a serious thing to say to a man on his own porch," Dunmore said. He did not deny it. He did not need to. Not yet, because he understood as well as Caleb did that an accusation without a witness willing to testify was only noise. "I've got boot prints leading from her cut fence to your range," Caleb said. "I've got 2 cuttings inside 3 months, both timed to put cattle on her cultivated ground right before a proving up hearing. I've got a land claim of 160 acres between your range and the only reliable creek water in 6 miles. And I've got you as the one man in this county who profits if that claim lapses." Dunmore looked at him for a long moment, the particular look of a man taking the measure of an obstacle he had not expected. "Boot prints," he said, "aren't a court of law." "No," Caleb agreed. "But a land office hearing isn't a court of law either. It's a hearing where a claimant proves her improvements hold, and I intend to be standing right beside her when she does it. And I intend to describe exactly what I found in that fence line in front of whoever the government sends to listen." He held Dunmore's eyes. "You've got 11 sections, and you've never fenced an acre of it in your life. That's your choice, and it's legal. Cutting another person's wire to make her look unfit for a claim that's rightfully hers is a different thing. And if it happens again before that hearing, I will make certain the land agent hears every detail of it, with names, if I have to sit outside your bunkhouse every night until I get them." He did not wait for a response. He turned his horse and rode back to the Foster place, and he did not know, riding, whether he had just ended the trouble or made it considerably worse. On the ride back, he stopped at the northeast corner of the Foster claim, the same corner cut twice already, and dug a little at the base of the original boundary post, the one Thomas Foster himself had set 6 years before when he first proved the survey line. Under the frost heave and the years of weather, Caleb found the surveyor's iron pin still driven true and square, exactly where the government map said it should be, untouched by any of it. Whatever else had happened to this family, whatever Dunmore had tried and would still try, the actual line, the one a dead man had set with his own hands and his own 2 years of labor, had never once moved. Caleb covered the pin again and stood a while looking east toward Dunmore's range, and found that he had, without quite intending to, started thinking of the line as something he meant to defend the way a man defends his own name. For 9 days, nothing happened. Abby finished the last of the spring planting, and Caleb rebuilt the northeast corner a third time, deeper and tighter than either previous attempt, and the two of them fell into a rhythm of work that neither one commented on directly, but that had become, without either intending it, something closer to a life shared than a job performed. On the evening before the hearing, they sat on the porch steps together and watched the light go long and gold across land that had, against every reasonable expectation, held. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Abby said, "I want you to know the fence is the best it's ever been. That's yours. Nobody can take credit for that but you." "The fence was never the hard part," Caleb said. She looked at him. What was? "Staying long enough to care whether it held," he said. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, without any particular drama in her voice, the way she said most things that mattered, "You could stay after tomorrow too, whatever the hearing decides." "I know," he said. "I intend to." The hearing was held in the land office in town, before a registrar sent out from the territorial capital and a receiver who kept the books, both of whom had heard a great many proving up cases that year and expected this one to be as routine as the others. Abby presented her case plainly. The house, the cultivated acres, the continuous residence through 6 years since filing, the crop yields from each season, the improvements made and maintained. It was, by every measure the law asked for, a complete and honest claim. It was Dunmore's man, a foreman named Pruitt, who spoke against it, exactly as Caleb had expected he would, testifying that the Foster fence had failed repeatedly, and that cattle had wandered onto claimed ground without adequate enclosure. Evidence, he suggested, that the claimant could not maintain the improvements the law required. He went further than Caleb had expected too, hinting in careful, deniable language at the arrangement of an unmarried woman keeping a hired man on her claim, letting the registrar draw whatever conclusion about a fit and proper household he cared to draw without Pruitt ever having to say the thing outright. The registrar, a tired man named Voss, who had sat through 100 of these hearings that year alone, looked at Abby for a long moment after Pruitt finished. And Caleb felt, for the first time since riding onto the Foster place in April, something close to real fear. A hearing was not a court, and a registrar's impression carried weight the law did not officially grant it. If Voss decided, on nothing more than Pruitt's careful insinuation, that this claim smelled wrong, 6 years of a dead man's labor and his daughter's could be undone in an afternoon by nothing more solid than a rumor dressed up as testimony. "Mr. Hutchins," Voss said, "is employed on the claim." It was not quite a question, but it was not nothing either. "I am," Caleb said, standing. "Hired the second week of April to repair fence that had been cut twice already. I have slept in the barn every night since, which the claimant's nearest neighbor, Mrs. Odell, can confirm, since her land borders the yard and she has a clear view of the barn door from her own porch. He had ridden 2 miles out of his way that very morning to make certain Mrs. Odell would say exactly that if asked, and he was gambling, standing there, that Voss would ask. Voss did ask. Mrs. Odell called forward, confirmed it plainly, with the flat certainty of a woman who had no reason to lie for either side and every reason to be irritated at having her morning taken up with the question. The insinuation, unspoken and therefore unanswerable a moment before, collapsed the instant it was given a shape a witness could actually confirm or deny. Caleb stood when the registrar asked if anyone present had further knowledge relevant to the claim. He described the boot prints. He described the clean cuts in wire that weather does not make. He described riding the tracks to Dunmore's own range not once, but twice. And the conversation on Dunmore's porch, word for word, including Dunmore's failure to deny the accusation when an innocent man would have denied it immediately and loudly. He described the timing of both cuttings, precisely aligned with the planting and growing season when trampled corn would do the most damage to a proving up report. He was not asking the registrar to take his word alone. He gave him names, dates, and an offer to ride the fence line with any land agent who wanted to see the splice work and the boot prints for himself before the spring rains washed them out. The registrar looked at Pruitt for a long moment. Pruitt looked at his hands. The claim was approved that afternoon. That Abigail Foster received her patent to 160 acres in the territory of Wyoming, land that was, from that day, entirely and unquestionably her own, held not by luck or by a dead father's ambition, but by 6 years of her own continuous work and by a fence that had finally been built strong enough and watched closely enough to outlast the man who wanted it to fail. Silas Dunmore did not trouble the Foster claim again. Word traveled fast in a county that size about a hearing where a foreman's testimony had collapsed under a fence rider's account, and a man who depended on quiet arrangements found it considerably harder to make them once his name had been said aloud in a government office with witnesses present. Caleb stayed. He did not leave the day after the hearing, or the week after, or the month after. He stayed through that summer's harvest, and through the following winter, and by the time the second spring came around, there was no longer a meaningful line between the fence rider who had drifted in following a rumor of cut wire and the man who worked the Foster land as though it were, in every way that mattered, his own. He asked her in March, on the anniversary of the week he had first ridden in, and she said yes, the way she said everything that mattered, without drama, with her whole steady attention. And they were married in the same small church in town where her father was buried. They built a second room onto the house that year, and a proper barn to replace the one Caleb had first found patched and swept and doing its best. Neighbors came for the barn raising, Mrs. Odell among them, and even Martha Klein from the general store, who brought a pie and said nothing at all about barns or chaperones, because there was nothing left to whisper once a county had watched a man stand up in a land office and defend a woman's claim with nothing to gain from it but the truth. Caleb fenced the whole 160 acres eventually, every line of it, tight and true, the kind of fence that a man builds when he has finally stopped wondering what it would feel like to have a boundary of his own and simply has one. Their daughter was born the following spring, and they named her Sarah, after nobody in particular, because Abby said some names should belong only to the person carrying them and not to the weight of everyone who came before. A second child, a son they named Thomas after the grandfather he would never meet, came 3 years after that in the same room Caleb had helped build with his own hands. Silas Dunmore sold his 11 sections and left the county before Sarah's 5th birthday, unable, in the end, to run a spread that size without the water he had once assumed would eventually fall into his hands. Caleb still rode fence for neighbors sometimes when they asked, because the skill did not leave him just because he no longer needed the wage. But he came home every night to land that had his name on the patent beside Abby's, filed and finished and entirely certain, And there was no describing to a man who had never drifted from ranch to ranch for 15 years what it means to ride toward a fence line at the end of a working day and know, before you even see it, that it is going to be standing. On an evening some years later, with Sarah grown enough to run the fence line herself chasing the dog, Caleb stood at the eastern boundary, the one that had been cut twice in the spring of 1888, and looked at wire he had restrung with his own hands more times than he could easily count. Abby came and stood beside him the way she had 100 times before. "Still checking it," she said. It was not quite a question. "Old habit," he said. "Or you just like an excuse to stand out here at sunset?" He considered that. "Maybe both," he said. She looked at the fence, at the land beyond it that was theirs by every right the law recognized and by every right that mattered more than law, at the daughter running the line with the dog, at the man beside her who had ridden in 15 years into a life of fixing things that were never his, and had, on one particular morning in April, found the one thing worth staying to fix. Caleb Hutchins had spent half his life building boundaries for other people and wondering, in the quiet moments no one else saw, what it would feel like to build one that was his own to keep. He found out on a claim outside a small Wyoming town, on land that a woman named Abigail Foster had refused to let go of, fence post by fence post, through 2 winters and a fight that was never really about wire at all. Some men spend their whole lives fixing what belongs to someone else. If you are lucky, and if you are willing to stay long enough to find out, one day you fix something and realize, without anyone having to tell you, that it is finally entirely yours. Thank you for spending this evening with Caleb and Abby. If their story kept you company tonight, wherever you are, I hope you carry a little of that steadiness with you into tomorrow, until the next story finds you.